Okay, once again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your Tuesday tutorial for Informatics 1A. So today we're basically going to be looking at the UJ grid. There are a few ways of locating the grid. So if you go on to Eve, just give me a second, try logging on my side. And obviously, I'm logging on to Eve as a lecturer and not a student, so my outlook is going to be a little bit different to yours. But Informatics 1, if you go under Notices, Student View, the latest notice is UJ Grid. So if you click on here or click on the UJ Grid itself, you should be redirected to a different web page that has, if you want to go directly to that web page, it's just eve.uj.ac.za/resources/IFM. You can download Notepad++. I do use it a few times in tutorials to show you what to show you code, but the one we're looking for is UJ Grid. So the moment you click on that, you can see mine says zip2 because I already have it downloaded. I've had it downloaded before. That's one of the ways to find the grid. Alternatively, if you go back to Eve, hopefully I can do that. If you go back to Eve and lectures, come on. Lectures at the bottom there is UJ Grid installation guide. So this is one of the guides. If you install it using, fortunately I can't scroll up anymore. If you install it using the previous link in that zip file, let me try and see if I can't open that zip file. Here is the zip file, UJ Grid 2. If you double click on it, there is UJ Grid again. Obviously, you need to unzip it. There is a tutorial on how to set it up, and here is the UJ Grid itself. So in that, you do have a tutorial PDF telling you how to install it and the grid itself. But there is the installation guide on here as well, which is a bit more detailed than the one that you get from the resources link. Kind of tells you what the UJ grid is, how to install it, what is the point of the UJ grid. Next to this, if you go to additional files, the UJ grid DLL is there. So those are the two places where you can find the UJ grid itself. So after downloading it, I'm just going to open Visual Studio so that you can see how to install it. And once again, like we discussed last week, the UJ grid only works with Windows Form apps with the .NET framework in brackets. So if you search for it, it's the second one. So click on that. Next. Today is Tuesday. Right, yes. 28. Okay, here is my form. Because I already do have the UJ grid installed, if I go, mine is under common Windows forms. There it is, drag and drop it. There's the UJ grid. If you don't have it installed, here's one of the few things you need to know. Where you put it needs to be where it's going to be forever. So if, let's go back to, let me go back to downloads quickly, sorry. They should be somewhere. Okay, so I'm just going to drag this to the desktop. Okay, don't mind everything else you see in here. So here is the UJ grid itself unzipped. Here is the grid. Here is the DLL. So we don't care too much about the guide. We just want the DLL itself. So here's some of the issues that students tend to do. You put the DLL on your desktop and you install it into Visual Studios. Then you move it from the desktop. Now that link between where it was on the desktop and now after moving it, there is no more. That link is severed. So just make sure you put it in the VB file somewhere where you'll keep it there forever, so to speak. Or you can just leave it under downloads and install it from there. Okay, so how do we install it? Simply right click on here and go to choose items. So anywhere in the toolbox, if you right click, go to choose items. This is basically us trying to add something into the toolbox. Choose items, and this pop-up will, this list will pop up. It's all of the things you can possibly add to Visual Studios. The one that we want is the UJ grid. So I'm just gonna go browse, and mine here is my UJ grid. Open, and once you click on open, it's going to be populated in there along with all of the other things. Just make sure that it's clicked here. The check is on, and okay. So if you click on OK, there is, if you already have it installed, you can also just click on reset. And by resetting, you're removing everything else. Don't do that. Wait, restore all the custom. Okay, no, that's not what I wanted to. So don't reset. Just make sure you add the DLL. If you want to check if it's there, you can simply just scroll down until you get to UJ grid. Come on. Nope, I skipped it. There it is, and it's still checked. So once you have that, it should appear in your toolbox somewhere. In some instances, it appears under general. In my instance, it appeared under common Windows forms. If you can't find it just by looking, the easiest way is to just say UJ grid, search UJ, and if it's installed, it will appear there, allowing you to drag and drop it. Okay, are there any questions with the installation of the UJ grid?
You mentioned the correct project type to start this in.
Yes, so the correct project type is Windows Form Apps with .NET in brackets. If you try and open it in the other Windows Form Apps without the .NET, it's not going to be in your toolbox. It will not appear in the toolbox. Yes.
Is the UJ grid on the school computers?
Yes, in the lab computers, it is pre-installed. You don't have to do any of this. You only have to do this on your personal computer. So the lab computers already have it pre-installed.
And you only have to do it once on your machine, because once you actually have it on your machine, then hopefully Visual Studio will remember that your UJ grid is sitting there the whole time. The only thing is, if you're in the labs and you start the project and you don't see the UJ grid, the most likely reason is because you have selected the wrong Visual Basic project type, which is the Windows Form app, but without the .NET framework in brackets.
Okay, yeah, and the only way that it would go missing, once again, is if you have told Visual Studios where to find it, and then you moved it, which only makes sense, right? If you tell it it's under downloads, here's where the DLL is, and then at a later stage you delete it from there, then that link is going to be severed. Then you'd have to do this again.
We really highly recommend that you don't leave it in the downloads folder. Rather do something like what Mr. Labier did here, which is extract it into a folder on your computer, so you know that it will always be there.
Yeah. Okay, so how many of you have ever played the game Battleship? Okay, 2, maybe 3 online people. Anyone played Battleship before? Okay, we've got one person. So we do like using that analogy to try and explain how the grid works. So what I've done is I have downloaded a grid. Where's my grid? think this is the grid. Yeah, there we go. It's quite tiny, my grid. Try and make it bigger. And move it up as, okay, I'm just gonna, let me drag it from here. Try and make it bigger on the other page. I created the link for it, so you should have.
Yeah, I wouldn't need to because I'm signing in with my account.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but if we had to.
Okay, so Paint kind of works. The issue is just getting it to the right size.
I think it's fine.
I'm painting stuff on it. Give me a second. Okay, let's just leave it as this because I can't get the whole thing on the display. But how do you typically play Battleship? Anyone who's played it before? Yeah. You call a letter and a number, and then the corresponding place where that letter and number is called is where you're going to drone strike, right? And the other person has to. So basically, the game is you have this 10 by 10 grid, and you get to put little battleships on there. There is a cover between you and the person that you're playing with. You put your ships wherever you want to put them, and as soon as each one takes turns. So you get to guess where the other person's battleships are. And if you get it right, they get, if you get it right, you get to bomb their battleships, you get to play again. When you get it wrong, you hit an empty spot, it's their turn to play. Does it make sense? Quite easy, right? Okay, so as mentioned, the best way to do this is, what is happening? I'm gonna stop share.
I've shared my screen.
Okay. The best way to do this is you need to know which column and which row you want to attack. And that's simply how the UJ grid works as well. In order to put information into the grid, you need to know which row and which column you'd like to put that information and what information you'd like to add there.
Can you see? I'm showing the camera here. Ladies and gentlemen, can you see the screen?
Online people?
Online people? No. I'm sharing my.
Give us a second. We're having some technical difficulties.
Okay, well, I've shared my video there.
But it's very tiny.
I know. But they should see it. Unless you are.
Because maybe.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you see the video now?
It's
Okay, perfect. Right. I know, but then the idea is they can see it live. Okay.
Yeah, but we can't see the numbers.
I don't think I can go further than this. Maybe you must move your screen.
Is it forward or backwards? What's the issue?
Okay, you can see it now. You can see the numbers now. And then you must just move it out.
There we go. I'm gonna move away. Yeah, okay, that's good enough.
Okay, right. Let me just go back to the chat. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so this is a typical, I'm hearing myself twice, but that's fine. This is a typical grid for the game. So as we said, you need to identify a row. They made it easier by making the the columns numbers and the rows alphabets. That way, if I say I'm looking for A1, where would A1 be? The first one, right? Can you? Okay, I'm guessing you can't reach A1.
Yeah, I can reach.
So over here. Okay, so the same principle as I said. So right now we're trying to attack A1, but in the form of a grid, we would like to put some information there. So that's basically the whole relationship between the rows and columns and text when it comes to the UJ grid. Yeah, but I still. So yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Okay, okay, so the whole point, ladies and gentlemen, of this exercise is that we want to just go through this whole thing. So if you play Battleship and you want to target a certain space in this grid, then we need to provide what kind of information before. So how many pieces of information do we need to supply at any given time in order for us to put one piece of text in our grid? So let me check. So there's one person that says we need 2 pieces of information. Online people, what do you think? Okay, 3. There's a 3, an offer for 3 at the back.
You've got 2 online.
There's a 2, there's a 2, there's a 3. Is that a 3? Is that a 2? That's a 2. Okay, so there's a number of 2s and 2s and 2s. Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to go straight for the 3. What are the 3 pieces of information we need to provide at all times? All right, so the idea is, and 3 actually makes sense, because if you think about it, we need to specify which row, we need to specify which column, and I think that's what most of the people who said 2 were. Okay? But the third piece of information you need is you actually go, well, now that I'm there, what do you want to do when you're there? You want to put a piece of text there, don't you? So in other words, it's 3 pieces of information each and every time you want to put something in a UJ grid. So the whole point of today's exercise really is to show you how important it is that you do this correctly and in what order to do so. Okay, is it possible for me to just go, I want to put a piece of text in this grid somewhere, so I'm going to just go apple. Who thinks that would be okay?
Would that work for a text box? Yes, right. I'm simply going to say, here's the text box, dot text should equal to apple. So why can I do that with a text box, but I can't with a grid? Yeah.
Because with the grid, you have to specify a way.
But why?
Sorry?
But why do I have to specify a way?
So that you don't get an error.
You don't get an error. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Not quite correct, but yes, that's one way of looking at it. Do you have an answer?
If you don't specify, it's all going to put it in one place.
Chances are it's all going to put it in one place. And do you want it all in one place? No. What is the reason? What is the reason for us using a grid in the first place? Why are we using a grid? Yes. Well, that's the reason, that's the idea behind the program. But can't we keep track with the text box? I think we can. Don't you think we can?
How many things can we put into the text box at a time? 1. Why would we want to use a grid instead? So that we can put in multiple text, right? So we can put it anywhere here. Does that make sense? But remember, with the same idea with the array, we can't just go, here's a grid, you can put a lot of things in there, and we're just going to chuck text at this text box. Because it needs to go in some location in this text box, so that we know at that particular location, this text goes there. All right. And so it's really important that we specify where to put it in the text box. Now, we've already established that we can't just put the string apple and go, for example, here, apple. So I've got apple here, right? I've got the word apple. And I'm just going to go chuck it here somewhere. Because it's not going to work. We're going to have to specify somewhere here is where we put apple. But if we don't indicate which row and column, and we just go, text must be apple, what do you think will happen? So before we specify the row and column, we just go, the text is equal to apple. What do you think the UJ grid is going to think the row and column should be? Because it obviously needs a row and column before it knows where to put this. So if we do not specify, so if we just put the grid on, we set it up, and we said, start off with the first line of code, and we said, this grid's name, .text, is equal to apple, where in this UJ grid do you think apple will appear? So I think the two options are really, either you tell me where it appears, or number two, you're going to tell me, oh no, there's an error, it won't allow you. So who thinks it's going to be, it won't allow you, there's going to be an error? Who reckons that? Online people? People in front of us, people? Nobody. So you all think it's going to work somehow. So then where is it? If we know that it will appear, where on this UJ grid will it appear? Yes?
The 0, 0.
Yeah, put it there. Okay, then the question is, why do you think? Okay, and obviously it replaces that pink slip that we have there that we. Okay, why do you think it's there? Okay, you've already answered and you reckon it's 0, 0. But why is it 0, 0?
Sorry, trying to get.
You destroyed the grid. Okay, the grid is back. Why do you think it's 0, 0? Come on, think about it. Any ideas from online?
No, they don't.
No, nobody. Okay, anybody physically in front of us? You've already answered. Try someone else. Try to guess. Why do you think it's 0, 0? What do you think?
The minimum size for the grid will be 0, 0.
Okay, let's ask this question. Okay. If you declare a variable of type integer and you don't do anything with it, and you then go display the content of that variable in a text box. Okay, so you declare a variable, let's call it variable A, and it's type integer. You don't do anything to it. You don't put any values into it. And then you display variable A in a text box. What will that text box display? Has anyone tried? So if you try to declare a variable which you don't use at all, and then you just go, oh, by the way, show us what is the value of that variable. So she's tried. Anybody else? Yes.
There's an online answer that says unknown, maybe a large number.
Maybe a large number. Why would it be maybe a large number? Does the computer go, you haven't used me. I'm going to give a random large number. What is more likely? If if you've got a variable and you don't do anything to it, by default, yes. What do you think it is? But what is it? We wouldn't be there's no previous. You've written a code. You've written code here. You said I've got a variable for variable A, and you press the play button. There's no previous.
There's an online answer that says error.
Error. Okay. Do you think it might be error?
Yeah.
No. Yes. That is an interesting answer. What do you think?
Why 0? So what variable type is my what type is my variable that I've created? Integer. Okay, then it's going to give me 0. Okay, it's an interesting approach. So if it's a string, is it going to write out 0, or is it going to be 0?
And what if it was a double?
0.0?
I don't know. I don't know. That sounds like a crazy idea. Online people, what do you think?
I'm still sitting on error.
Error. Okay. We still okay. All right. Okay. Let's tell you the answer before you all are no too much. The answer is right. It's 0. Okay. If it's a string, then it's empty. It's empty. There's no characters in it. But when it comes to an integer, when you declare a variable, which is an integer, the default value is 0. So in other words, the starting value for a variable that you declare, which happens to be an integer, will be 0. And if it is a double, then it will be 0.0. All right? And so the idea is if you don't assign it anything, it will be 0. So if you think about the UJ grid, and you go, hey, I'm not going to specify a row or column, but what I'll do is I will start and just place the text apple into the grid. What the grid will say is, well, I obviously need a row and a column. And if you're not going to specify a row or column, I'm going to go with what we call the default values of the row and a column. And the the row and column, can you get something like row 5.5, column 6 3/4, like it was Harry Potter? Can you? No. So in other words, it's going to be an integer. Rows and columns are integer values. So what is the default value for row and column if you don't do anything to it? 0 and 0, which is what this lady has said in the front. That she reckons you're going to place apple in row 0, column 0, which in this grid here is labeled as A1. Does this make sense? Online people, does this make sense? Okay.
You're still saying error. I actually tried it. To go, the best way to deal with things is to try them out.
Okay, right, let's try.
So I've got my button over here. Double click on the button and the code.
I think you need to unmute. I'll mute you.
I'll move it, but it's one line of code. Can everyone see that one line of code? Online people?
It's not clear. Okay, they can see it.
Yeah, they should be able to see it.
Right.
So I just basically just read my grid.name, and text should equal to apple. So that's the code that's going to run when I press the button. So I'm executing the program. On a different screen, drag it over. And obviously, yes, this is not ideal, right? This is too big. The button does not have the right naming convention, all of that. But the point is just trying to test out what's going to happen. And I click on the button, it says Apple. So it defaulted to 00 and wrote Apple in 00. Contrary to some belief online, it did not give us an error.
Just to prove to you that that's true. Okay, so and gentlemen, what we now need to do is we go, okay, fine, we've established that we need to provide a row and a column. Can we provide the column number first and then the row number and then the text? What do you think? Does it have to be row first, then column, then text? Who reckons row first, then column, then text only?
I reckon there's order in that. I'm behind the row, column, text.
And who thinks it's okay to do column first, then row? Because come on, alphabetical order.
Skip got one person.
All right. And who thinks I don't care right now? Probably the whole lot of you who have not put your hands up at all. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's try this out. Okay. We've established that we can't put the text first. So in other words, text must be specified last. But what's up for debate now is, do we have to specify the column first, then the row, or do we only specify the row and then the column? Then the other question I want you to consider is, do we always have to specify the row and the column at the same time? You know, it must always be row and column before the text. All right, so just some consideration. Okay, so with this example, we all know that our nodes A, B, C up to F, and then there's 1 to 10 here. However, you do know that it will be 0 to 9, and then 0 to 6, 0 to 5. Okay, on the side, in terms of the rows. And it's really important that you can tell the difference between rows and columns. Please don't mix them up. I know it sounds like, wait, why would I swap out rows and columns and get them wrong? You'd be surprised, but every time we mark semester tests, the first semester test, as a matter of fact, we see students getting it wrong. So we ask, please place something in the following row, and then they put something in the column. You all know what rows and columns are. You all can tell the difference between rows and columns, hopefully.
Who doesn't know the difference between rows and columns? Okay, so columns, think about it from I've got a architectural or building background. So columns are usually holding stuff up. They are, as you're walking, are there any columns?
Roman columns.
Are there any columns on campus?
Just think of the Roman columns.
Yeah, the Roman columns, right? Stand up, holding up the roof. We've all seen that sort of scenery. Yes? The people who said they're confused? Yes. So once you know columns are straight up, then rows are the opposite. Same thing with vertical and horizontal. I had that issue in high school, and the best way to deal with it was horizontal has an H, so it's, wait, I'm confused. Oh wait, no, it was actually vertical is a V, so they are standing, then you can, that's vertical. Horizontal has the bar, yeah, it was correct. Horizontal has the H has the bar in the middle, but yeah. So if you can kind of know one, then you know the other, and my way of looking at it is just columns hold things up, and they normally vertical, and rows are horizontal.
This is why Mr. Labier is in IT. He didn't continue with his architectural dreams. Okay, all right, so let's try with this experiment here. So we are going to say that the row is, and let's use these let's use this numbering, but we know that A is 0 here, okay? And we say, go to the third column, all right? Go to the third column in the second row and specify the text banana. All right. Where would you put this then? If I said it's the third column, second row, what would you specify? So if the name of this grid is, I don't know, what do you call grid tut?
Yeah.
GRD tut, okay, GRD tut. And I'm saying specify the third column, second row, the string should be banana. What would your code be? What would your instructions be?
So online says B3. We also have NC who's actually looking at the difference between columns and rows, saying columns look at the I and you'll know it's vertical. So COL, yeah, L rather than the I. So COL and the L will tell you that it's the vertical. So once you know that, the opposite is rows. But yeah, the instruction would be B3 according to the online people.
Okay. Physical people, do you think it's B3?
Got a few that are saying no.
Okay, where do you think it, okay, then we also have C4.
We've got C4. So
Okay.
it's between B3 and C4.
Okay. What do you
Anyone
think?
else has a different number?
Chuck bingo. Or not bingo.
Anyone else?
You're all gonna agree. It's one of the two. Actually, I think there's three groups here.
So I actually think it's C4.
C4. Yeah, but C4 is part of the list. So do you have any, is there anyone with something different to B3 and C4?
I think it's between B3, C4, and I don't care. Unfortunately, for those who don't care, the semester test is coming up.
Yeah, I was about to say, the issue with the third faction, you're going to get to a point where you need to care for your semester test.
We don't care if we give zero, you know. We're happy to give zeros.
Actually, Prof. Lum is not that happy to give zeros. She always has to go and get herself a McFlurry after giving people zeros.
Yeah.
It's very taxing for her.
Very, very. You know, if you see me at the McDonald's, you know that things aren't going well. Especially if I go 2 McFlurries, please. Okay, all right, so your options are, well, some people saying it's B3.
B3.
Okay, so banana might be here. Could be banana could go here, right? Or banana could also go here.
B3. Or C4.
Yeah, so it could be these two. Right, so let's look at B3, okay? What would you say the row of B3 is? Which row is it? It's, so if you were to specify the address, so if you were to write the text, you go grd tut dot row equal, what would the number be for B3?
Yes. The row would be 1. Okay.
So you're saying it's 1. Who else reckons it's 1? Okay, so online people, if you're wondering, there's a lot of people who are now suddenly deciding that they want to put their hands up. Because the lady at the back has got a pretty good accuracy rate of answering the questions. Now she's embarrassed. Okay, right. Okay, let's have fine. We think it's 1. Okay, its row is equal to 1. And then obviously we go grd_tut.col is equal to, and what would the col be? 2. You say it's 2. Okay.
3 on there. It literally has 3 on top of it.
Okay, so Mr. Levier is going, he doesn't agree. All right, now let's look at the other one. Okay, let's look at C4. What is the row number that you would specify to go to C4? You would say it's 3, right? 2, 3, what do you think? Okay, and if you specify the column, what would the number be? Okay, on that note, What happens if I go grd_tut.cols is equal to 4? What will happen if I use cols is equal to 4? Okay, let's have some other people put their hand up or volunteer the answers, because right now it's team lady in front and lady at the back. Pretty much. Anybody else? Okay, and sometimes, dude there and dude here in front. It's just like 4 people answering the whole time. And on occasion, you put your hand up and you also give your input. The rest of you, come on. What happens if you specify cols? Cols is equal to 4. Yes, what do you think will happen?
What happens to the rest of them? They won't? They won't appear. Okay.
So in other words, is that something we want? What does it make sense that you specify the grid to the size, and then in the middle of the program, while you're busy entering information into the grid, you decide, I'm going to set the size of the grid again. Does that make sense? No. Okay, so in other words, what have you learned from that exercise? That you never use cols and you never use rows while you're busy putting things on the grid. Does this make sense? You only do it right at the beginning when you go, I haven't set the size of my grid yet, I now need to do it, so let me do that now. Okay, so Mr. Labier is now going to try that and show you that is the case. Are you going to do that? Yes.
Yeah, I'll do that.
So can you set like, for example, 100 rows because you don't know how many inputs you have to do?
Okay, you.
No.
I was going to answer that. Okay, I didn't mean no K as in yes you may. Yeah, I was going to go. Okay. Yes. So online people, you heard Mr. Labier. You actually hopefully you heard the question. All right. So if you don't know how many rows and columns there are, can't you just specify an arbitrary large number like 100 rows, 100 columns?
No.
And then Mr. Labier was no, and I will reiterate that no. Why not? This poor person standing up. But why? It's not going to be bad, is it? You see, the thing is, you will, in the way we ask the program, for any of your problems, is you will know eventually at some point what the rows and columns will be. So you will leave it by default on its 2 by 2. Okay? As you drag, it's obviously got a default number of rows and columns, and you leave it like that. Then, once you know exactly how many rows and columns you need, you will then specify those rows and columns and do all the labeling. All
So
right.
one thing I can say you can do is, if you're expecting a large number of rows and columns, is resize the grid itself, not the rows and columns. So right now, I'm still leaving it at 2 and 2, but let's say I foresee 2 columns and a lot of rows. What I can accept is you doing this. That. Where it's still open, the columns are still just 2 columns, 2 rows, but you kind of anticipated that it's going to go vertical and just make it longer. Or if you anticipate more columns, then just make it longer that way. But keep it at 2 and 2, because it's a wasted line of code to say 100 and fill it out, and then later on find out how big it needs to be and then resize it again. Rather leave it as the default. As soon as you have all of the information needed to resize, then you resize. Same thing with an array. So imagine if it was an array and you said you need 100 spaces, and later on you only need 2. So you've wasted that space. So just leave it open until you know how big it needs to be.
Okay, so Mr. Labier is now going to write code, I assume.
Yeah, I wrote the example as rows, right? So I've got grd chat.calls is equal to 4.
Okay.
And let's run that. Okay, so that happened. How many columns do I have now? How do you know that? Can you see how many columns I have? Okay, so this is one of the reasons why I'm saying if you're anticipating more columns, just make it more space. But there is also a little scrolly there at the bottom. I don't know if you guys can see it.
I don't think they can.
The online people can. I don't know if the physical people can.
Okay. Right.
Do you trust me enough to believe that there's a little scrolly at the bottom? I mean,
Scrolly.
there we go. So, and rather let me change it around, and instead of columns, let's make it rows because I've put provisions for much. No. Okay, there we go. So whenever you use plural is when you want to resize. When you are talking to a specific row or column in the grid, it's singular. So rows resizes, row specifies which one. Okay, does that make sense? Are there any questions with what we've covered so far? Yes.
What would happen if you were to specify a row and column that doesn't exist?
So that's a very interesting question. There's two things that happen. Visual Studios goes, you poor child, there is no such column, there is no such row, but I'm not going to crash because I realize what's happening. But what we make you do, just like with the conversions where before the cint and cdbl and c string, Visual Studios did that for you. There's a piece of code we are going to give you to put into your code, which is going to stop Visual Studios from doing that. So basically now it's just going to crash. So this is what happens.
So maybe you can change the code, so stop the program, and keep it at rows is equal to 4. But now we're going to go and say gridtut.row is equal to 100. Okay, you know that doesn't exist. And gridtut.col is equal to is equal to 1. Make it 1. Column 1. And you agree there is a column 1. Okay. Right. And then we go gridtut.text is equal to error. Right. And let's run this and see what happens. Okay, online people, ready to see what happens.
There we go, and click button. So you see what it says? It says debug mode on. The row specified is invalid. You tried to specify row 100, but there are only 4 rows. Right? And I go, okay, cool. Chances are none of you are going to read this. You're just going to click, okay. And it goes away. Your program is still running, right? But we're going to switch off that debug mode. So basically, when we start marking, you'll notice in this week's practical, you have all of the things that you need to do. It's all out of 50, right? And at the bottom, there's correct execution, which is out of 50 as well. So your mark is essentially going to be divided between correct execution and code. So if input is 10 marks, you're going to get 10 marks for the code, and in the correct execution, you're going to get 10 marks for it correctly executed. So in this case, we just started, And if this crashes, everything after this will be given 0 as far as execution is concerned, because it doesn't execute. Does that make sense? That's something we don't want. Here's a more common error, which gets you guys all the time. What do you think is going to happen? And this is where the English starts getting to become an issue. Because if we try
So
run
you
this-
agree there's 4 rows, and we're saying go to row 4 and put this information there.
And then I have students that come to me and go, it says you tried specifying row 4, but there are only 4 rows. What are you saying? What is the issue here?
Lady at the back, come on. No. Lady at the back, you answer all the time. Let's give someone else an opportunity. Do it in front.
Yes. What? What do you mean? Okay, so when we start counting at 0. So the first one is 0. Can you agree on that? Okay, so if we say we want 4 rows, when it comes to counting, we have 0, 1, 2, 3. Does that make sense? Okay, so now if you're saying you want row 4, what would that be as far as our counting is concerned? Row 5, right? Is there a row 5? No, there isn't. And the reason why it becomes complicated is because the computer is also counting from 0. So that's why it's saying 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas there's 5 of them. Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, just always keep in mind to start counting from 0. So the first one there, the blue one in the corner there, start. We do agree this is 0, 0. Okay, so it's row 0, column 0. But it's the first one. 0 is the first one. Okay. And yeah, again, if we did have debug mode off, this would crash.
Okay, so treat at the moment by default, the UJ grid has debug mode set on. And that is like the training wheels for you. So it's training wheels so that if it does have an accident, you don't. But by the time you have to submit your practicals for marking, you've got to turn the debug mode off to say it's ready. It's ready for the program to get marked. It's not going to crash. Right, so with that in mind, now that you know it's actually 0, 1, 2, 3, if there are 4 rows, it's actually 0, 1, 2, 3. And that means that you are specifying text in the 4th row, you agree? Even though it's row 3. So let's check that. We click on the button. Now it goes to error. Can you see? Now it's correct. Would you agree that we did specify it in row? That is 4th row, right? 2nd column, 4th row. So with that in mind, and we go back to our grid, we had that whole debate of whether it was B3 or C4. Can you see why we did this exercise? So what was the correct answer? Is it B3 or is it C4?
What was the question? Row 2, column 3.
Are you sure? Or did I say go to the 3rd column? The 4th column?
I think she said go to the 3rd column. 2nd row, yes. So that's where I'm saying the English just kind of goes out of the window. and the understanding is a bit wonky. But here's the question again. It's third column, second row.
So where is third column, second row? Does that make sense, online people?
So which one is it? Is it B3? Is it C4?
This is like a blue dress, gold dress question.
Yeah.
Okay, we said it was the third
Yes.
third row, third
Third
column.
column.
Third column.
Third column,
Okay,
second
let's
row.
count.
Column.
First column.
First column.
Right? First column. First column is this one. Then this is the second column. This is the third column. Okay. In terms of numbering, it is 0, 1, 2. But it's the third column. Column equal to 2 is the third column. By that same token,
We had
rows.
that entire exercise where I said 0 is first. Remember that. Okay, so when we are counting, we start counting at 0, which is the first one. So in this case, if we say the third column, which one is the first column? We did this like a second ago. Which one is the first column? 0. Which one is the second column? Which one is the third column? 2. Okay, eventually we're getting there. So which one is it? Is it B3 or C4? B3. Okay. Anyone still say C4? I think that was like 2 minutes ago. So
Okay.
maybe.
Online people, are you convinced it's B3? I hope so. All right. So let's consider the following. So if we write code, please re-explain.
Please re-explain. Okay. So when we start counting, as far as the grid is concerned, same thing with your array, we start counting at 0. So contrary to popular belief, on top there it says 1, 2, 3. 1 would be 0 when we start counting. Are you okay with that? That we start counting at 0?
And would you agree this is the first column?
Yes, no, maybe. The student that asked us to explain. Okay, so you get it now. Yes, so we start counting at 0, but that's the first one. Yeah, I think we're all on the same page.
Good. All right, so I think what we can then do is explain the difference between specifying the row and the column, the row first and the column first. Well, the column first or the row first, and whether it makes a difference.
Okay.
Okay, so if I were to tell the computer, VB, and I say, let's not specify the row first, let's specify the column first, because it seems that we have been specifying the row first, then the column, and then the text. But the question now is, can I specify the column first, then the row, and then the text? Okay, so if I say the column is equal to 1, and the row is equal to 2, and then I specify the text, will I then still get to where I need to on the grid? What do you think? Or do you think BB is going to be, how dare you? The row must be specified first. Yes, no? Who reckons it's okay? There's like 4 or 5 people, 6 people that reckon it's going to be okay. The rest of them are like, no, order is important. Okay, so Mr. Labia, maybe we can then, well, we don't need this screen anymore. Let's switch to,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I like the fact that most of you have taken
So I was saying, I'm glad that most of you seem to have gotten the part where we said sequence is important down, but that's not really the lesson here. So if I say row 3 and column 1, or column 1 and row 3, is there a difference between the final destination? Is there a difference? Someone said yes. So if I say go, if I say go left then right, and then I switched it around and I said go right then left, are you going to end up at the same place? Think about it.
I think that's another great example.
So if I said go straight and then go left, then go right, and I said go straight, then go right, then go left, are you going to end up at the same place? No, right? So it matters which direction you're going to go first, right? But if I said go left first and then go right, and then I said go right and then, no, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But the point is, the row will always be a row, right? Column will always be a column. If I start by saying row 3, column 1, or column 1, row 3, is the end result the same?
Let's just run this and see how it goes. Okay, so this is the normal one. We specify the row, then we specify the column. That's what you're used to.
Yeah, you have to drag it from the other screen.
There we go. Right, so we go there, and then you can see, okay, error is there. Right, now let's stop this program and do the exact same, but we're going to move column first. So we're going to specify the column first, then we specify the row, and then we say, now that you've got a location, go there and put the text error in that location. Does this make sense? So who reckons at this point in time that there will be an error, and who reckons this is going to run?
The question should be, is the destination still the same? Yes, it is. We haven't altered anything. So does it matter whether you specify row first or you specify column first? No, it doesn't. But does it matter where you specify the text? Yes, it does. Yeah. So text should always come after the coordinates have been given, both row and column. Doesn't matter which one you choose first, that's fine. But the text should be after we have all the information.
Okay, now the next question I want to ask is this. Let me go and copy this. I'm going to specify that the column is now 2. I mean, the row is 2. Let's make a row 1. And other text. All right. So what I'm doing here is my attempt is I want to place 2 pieces of text on the UJ grid in different locations. You agree? However, you'll notice that for the first one, I have specified that it will go, I will specify a column, I specify a row, and then I say the text goes here. What will happen if I don't specify the column this time round? I only specify the row number, and then say I'll place this text here. Now, we all know that every time we place text on the UJ grid, we should specify the row, the column before we specify the text. So now we are missing one piece of information here. What do you think will happen? Will I be successful in placing other text in another location on the grid? Yes.
It will be in the default column, so it will be 0 again.
Okay, let's take a look. So we go start.
I disagree.
Mr. Labia disagrees, by the way. Okay, so let's go. What happened then? Who can tell me what happened there? So we've now established that it does work. It does place the text somewhere else. Okay? Even though I didn't specify a column, it still did its job. Is it where I want it to be? I don't know, because I never specified it, but it didn't crash. So what happened here? Let's ask the online people. Let's try and give the online people an opportunity. Okay, NC that goes and says it goes to the last column specified. Is that true? Is that what happened? Yes, that is correct. Okay, now you noticed in the lecture notes code yesterday, that was what we did. And it works, but, it's a big but, is that a good thing to do? Where you go, I won't specify a column. I will rely on what the column used to be. Is that a good idea? No. A good practice would be to specify the row and column and the text each and every time you work with the text. Okay, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where I've been getting a lot of DMs from students during the marking of your practicals. Disclaimer, this is not me saying you're not allowed to complain. You're definitely allowed to complain, and we will handle all of your complaints as far as you feel like you have been unfairly marked. But this is that crossroads where, is it doing what you want it to do? The answer is yes, right? Is the code the way we taught you to do it? The answer is no. So that's where we have students saying, but it worked. Yes, congratulations. I am happy for you. But you did not do it how we taught you to do it. So this is the reason why you're not going to get all of your marks. Because yes, it works. You've proven to us what lengths of laziness you are willing to go. We are very proud that you can do this. But that's not what we taught you. And because the chances of something going horribly wrong when you do it like this exist. So it's better to just specify which row and which column, even though it's the same column as the previous one, but just specify it. As Prof. Ling mentioned, I think in week 2, we don't want to give anything away. We don't want to allow the computer to do things for us. So we want to be in control. We want to specify everything. So if you do something like this, we have given the markers strict instructions not to give you all your marks.
All right, and then you might go, oh, but that's what it says in the lecture notes. But that's not the point. Remember, we put up the lecture notes for discussion. So we can say, in class, we're going to talk about it. We can say, oh, look at all the things that are wrong with the code. You shouldn't be doing this. This is not ideal. And then the whole idea is to tell you and have that discussion and say, this is why it is not ideal. We don't want you to do it this way. In fact, anyone who comes to us and goes, oh, but it says so in the code in your own lecture notes that you did it this way, we're going to go, well, congratulations. Guess we now know who doesn't pay attention in class, or guess we now know who's been looking at the lecture notes for the first time ever. All right. So do keep that in mind. Now, the next part of our tutorial is we'd like to show you how we take an array and we map it onto this grid.
which is what I have noticed from class yesterday and all of the discussions we had with the grid, is that you guys don't really have an issue with the grid, do you? It's not, right? It's quite simple, row, column, text. The problem is when we start putting it in loops and you guys don't know what the hell is going on. That's what I've noticed, even with the code that we had yesterday. So obviously, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a tutorial, do we all know what we need to do when we start a Visual Basic project? Okay, is my form name correct? Are my button names correct? No. I'm not going to spend time doing those over and over in every tutorial I mentioned last week as well. So there are going to be certain things that I am doing. It's one of those situations where do as I say and not as I do. I am doing it to save time because we have to get to those important parts, but I'll still put my option statements.
please make sure for the semester test you know what they both do separately. Don't just tell me the two of them combined do these things. You need to know which one does what. And quick recap, what are the default values for num, numbers, sum, and counter? 0.
Okay, so we've seen these variables being declared before. It's in the same code that we had yesterday as well. I'm just going to comment this out. Keep it there, it's fine. So the first thing we want to do is get the number of numbers from the user, right? So I'll say numbers is equal to and after we get that, we can set our sum to 0.
So even though sum by default is set to 0, we still initialize sum and counter to 0 on line 12, because remember earlier Mr. Levia pointed out that we are in control. So we don't go, I think VB is going to set it to 0 for us. I mean, most of the time it will be 0 anyway. Are you willing to bank on that? No. You go, I don't care, maybe 99.9999% of the time it will be 0, but I don't want to wait for, gamble and a possibility that it isn't. So you go and on line 12 yourself, you go, I am going to make sure it's 0, and I do that by setting it to 0 myself.
And we need to get the array. Okay, so if I do
counter. Okay, why do you think, ladies and gentlemen, on line 17, you've got the squiggly red line there?
In line 16, it's because I can't spell.
Yeah, but besides that, on line 17, what is wrong with that? I mean, it's in a while loop, so surely VB is going to go, oh, I see, it's in a while loop, so you're going to ask us to ask the user for multiple values, and we're going to chuck all those values into that array.
I know why. It's because we did not convert our input box into an integer.
Oh, right, fix it, man. Go.
And you guys thought the same thing, right? There you go.
Sort it. No. Ask VB why.
It's because we have brackets here.
Oh, okay. Let's take the brackets out. Get rid of the brackets. Yeah, get rid of the brackets, man.
I think we need to add more brackets.
Okay, add more brackets. Yeah, add more brackets. No, more brackets. More.
Okay, so what does it say? It says over here, value type integer cannot be converted to integer. So both of them are integer.
Yeah.
But it cannot convert integer
to
integer. But it's integer.
Yeah.
So why do we need to convert it to an integer if it's already an integer?
Oh, we must take the C int away.
Okay, but that gets rid of my brackets.
Oh, okay, but maybe we keep the brackets there. We'll be okay.
Okay, more brackets.
Okay, yeah.
No.
No? Okay. Right.
Anyone willing to assist us? Someone who hasn't answered a question today.
Come on.
This should be quite easy.
No, I think they're thinking if we configure this out.
Obviously, we know one thing at this point. We don't need more brackets. That's not going to change much. What is the issue? So if we hover over here, it says cannot convert integer into integer. What is the difference between the two integers? Okay, let me just put my cn back here. Okay, there we go. What's the difference between these two integers? This one and that one. One has brackets. Okay, so are they the same thing? What does brackets mean? So if we scroll back up, what is this? It's an integer, right? What is this? It's an integer. Is this integer and that integer the same? No. What is the difference between the two integers? In terms of storage, what's the difference between those two integers?
Isn't one an array?
Isn't one an array? Isn't it? They don't have to specify a row and a column on the array. No, so that's something that a lot of students make. An array and a grid are not the same thing. So an array in this instance does not have a row and column. It just has an index. What has a row and column is a grid. So how many things can I store in this integer? One. How many can I store in this one? Yeah, there was a mumble there. It wasn't one, definitely. I didn't hear one. I just heard a whole lot of. What? How many can I store in that one? A lot, right? Do we know how many? No, we don't, but we know it's a lot. Okay, so let's go back to my error here. What is it trying to say? What type of integer, how many things can I store inside an array? A lot. Okay, how many things am I getting out of an input box? One thing. So basically, this is Visual Studio saying these two things are not compatible. I cannot make them into the same thing. How do I solve the problem? Yes, brackets, right?
So I think you have to specify the index between the store or that base store within the.
I need to specify the index. So within the array, where do I want to put that one value? Because the array is capable of storing multiple, I've got multiple spaces, right? It's just as much as, it's not as, we don't do this, but if you guys had assigned seats, and I said, when you come into the tutorial, go sit on your assigned seat. You need to know where to sit, right? If this was the whole room, just this first row was the whole room, I'd need to tell you, sit on the first chair, second chair, third chair, fourth chair. If I just said go sit, do you know where you're going to go and sit? No. Most of you are just going to wing it and sit wherever you want. But if you're disciplined enough, you have to wait until I tell you where to sit. So that's the issue we're having here. So the index would be over here, and I can say my index is counter.
Why is it counter?
Your thing says.
Yeah.
Why is it counter? What is the point of counter? Yeah, what is the point of counter? Okay, yes, that went a little bit beyond my question. So what is the point of the variable counter? Why do we have the variable counter? From the get-go, from even when we were working with if statements, what was the point behind counter? Yes. It's going to give it an index number. Okay, so when we were using counter with if statements, was it giving us index number? So it counts, right? So the point of counter is to count. We can all agree on that. Okay, so where do we start counting from? From 0 or from 1, depending on the application. So in this case, when we get to array at counter, what is the value of counter? The first time we get to line 17, what is the value of counter? It's 1. Okay, so arrays in informatics are different to arrays in computer science and in other languages. So just as we spent around 20 minutes on the grid saying we start counting at 0, with our arrays, we start counting at 0 as well. But in informatics, we don't really care for the 0th element. So we're almost always going to start populating our array at index 1 to kind of make it easier for you guys when it comes to the counting between 0 being first and all of that. So we always start at 1, which is why the line before is counter plus 1. So counter will start at 1. So array at counter, where is that? What index is that? Think about an array as a building, right? Starts at ground floor, first floor, second floor, all the way up. Okay, array at 1. Which floor am I referring to? Floor 1, right? And as the gentleman mentioned, counter is going to change each and every time we run the loop. So counter is going to start at 1, 2, 3 until the last value. Are we all okay with that? What is the issue with our array here? What have we not done? Yes. There's no initial size. Okay, so right now if I'm saying array at counter, what does that mean? If we try run this, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, let's do the sum is equal to sum plus array counter first, because the whole point is we want to add.
We want to add, yes.
Okay, and then maybe what we also want to do is we want to say grid touch dot row is equal to counter, because we want to put the number on row counter, and grid touch dot call is equal to 1. So grid touch dot text is equal to C string array counter, because remember array counter is an integer, so we want to convert it to a string, then put it there. After which we will then have grid touch dot text is equal to C string sum. We want to display the sum after it's done, but again we have to specify grid touch dot call is equal to 1, but which row? Grid touch dot row is equal to numbers, is it plus 1?
Plus 1, yeah.
Okay, so we've effectively done this. We've so what we've done in this code now is we have used the while loop to capture the numbers each time. After which we then add that number to our sum. We display the value that's been entered by the user on lines 19 to 21. And when we exit the while loop, it means we've entered all our numbers, so the sum is ready. So we display the sum in that last row. Now, obviously, we still also have to specify over here grid touch dot rows is equal to, and we are going to say it's numbers plus 1, or is it number 2 plus 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Why it's plus 2, we will explain it now. Let's just run the program. Wait for the form to appear. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to press this button, and it says numbers. Now, this numbers is actually asking us how many numbers we want to add up. So we're going to say we're going to add 3 numbers. Okay, press enter. Okay, now, before I proceed to enter numbers, let's look at this. We specified that the number of rows should be numbers plus 2. Why is it plus 2 rows? Well, think of this grid. We're entering 3 numbers, right? So where do we enter those? Where do we display those 3 numbers? In that row, and that row. So in other words, in the row 1, row 2, row 3. You agree? Why don't we put it in the first row? Because that's for our labels. What's this last row for? Do we not need it? Online people? Any ideas? What are we going to do? What are we going to display in the last row? If the top one is for our labels, which we are not going to do, I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3 there. The sum, yes, okay, so we're going to go give me value. So let's put in 10 there. Press OK. And our program crashes. Over to you, Mr. Olivia.
Okay, so our program at the bottom, if you check there, it actually does give us, it says we've got value and we've got nothing. The array is of size nothing. So what happens if I'm trying to put in, think about your arrays, if they try to put you in a floor that does not exist. Do you think you're going to be very comfortable there? No. Same thing happens here. We've said we want an array, but we haven't said how big our array needs to be. So does index 1 of the array exist? No, it doesn't. So that's where we need to resize our array by redimming array to num numbers. So ideally, for me, I would have moved that line under line 11. So my rule of thumb is at the moment I have enough information to resize, I'm going to resize. Okay, but let's see what happens now. So that's what it looks like. Obviously, we still need to label this and label that, but we're out of time to do that. Okay, are there any questions? We literally have like 3 more minutes. Yeah.
Is it possible to set the size of the array without having to read it back when we first create it at the top of the array?
Yes, we can create it at the top here. That's the difference between a static and a dynamic array. But at this point, do we know how big our array needs to be? No, we don't. So we can't set it before runtime. We can only set it after runtime. So as I was saying, this line would be moved up to over there, because as soon as I got num numbers, I can resize my array. So as soon as you have all the information you need, resize your array. Any other questions? So what's the purpose of redim exactly? So redim is reinitializing. So we have in line 5 over here asked Visual Studios to give us an array of an unknown number. So redim is basically saying go back to the variables that we have. There's a variable called array that I have created, but I didn't give it a size. So redim, meaning reinitialize or go back to that variable and then add this to it. So go back to array and resize that array. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if there aren't any more questions, that was today's tutorial. Do enjoy the rest of your afternoon.